So thanks, and I'm very glad to be the first speaker, by the way. And I also see in the audience, Professor William Drake is attending this seminar. And I will try to, it's not necessarily accurate in my presentation, but I try to be very concrete. The title is Governing the Rise of Market and also Grassroots. Actually, it's a co-rise. The Chinese government institutions in platform governance. And I will talk two things. I think number one, I would want to introduce a specific and a unique context about or before the rise or the introduction of the internet into China in the late 1980s, 1990s. So the next part, I'm going to, through a case studies approach, talk about three institutions. One is the National Radio and TV Administration in terms of online video platform governance. And the second case is about the Ministry of Transportation in terms of this ride-hailing platform governance. And also a third example is about the leading group for cybersecurity and informatization, which represent an overall approach, China's approach towards the cyber issues. So these three institutions I want to talk about. Firstly, there is this context, which is rather unique in China. So before the internet was introduced into China, there are two phenomena that I think that needs to be taken into consideration. One is about the rise of grassroots before 1978. So this is about revolutions and social movements, which flattened the traditional hierarchical Chinese society. And I would suggest that the 1950 marriage law was a kind of representation of a social equality in terms of gender. This is about the rise of grassroots. And this also happened in terms of market. So after 1978, the market mechanisms were introduced into China. And the protection of private business is enshrined by the constitution from then on. And that happened before the introduction of the internet into China. And now, as a result of this, in 2020, we see a kind of result like this. Digital private businesses nowadays, in terms of digital economy, are defining the digital lifestyles of 1 billion Chinese internet users. And this was the most recent report about the size of the digital economy in China, which is 39.2 trillion yuan. And that is nearly 40% of the GDP of the same year. And in that case, we can argue that China is the most dependent country on the digital economy. So China is the second largest digital economy, but China is the most dependent country on the digital economy in terms of the percentage of the GDP. And so that's the first thing I want to say, because that is a unique context before the rise of the internet. And then I would like to talk about some specific cases. And one example I want to draw your attention to is this government institution whose name is National Radio and Television Administration, and whose Chinese name is 国家广播电视总局. And I want to talk about a kind of failure of the institution's effort to apply the state ownership in broadcasting to online audio and video platforms. So this is what you are seeing is a structure a kind of a change of ownership in terms of broadcasting in China. And the kind of most important change happened firstly in 1978, when market mechanism was introduced. And the second kind of watershed is 2005. That is the starting time of private ownership in terms of, let's say, broadcasting or the audio video platforms. So I would say that is a kind of globalization symbol, because this Tudou or the kind of YouTube-like online platform went online in 2005, and it was invested by venture capitalists, including this venture capitalists from the United States and from the Middle East and from also Singapore. It is also listed in NASDAQ. And that represents the rise of private ownership in China. And before that, there were party monopoly and also marketization and conglomeration, but that is all about the state capital or the state ownership. So the year 2005 is very important in understanding about the rise of audio and video platforms. However, if we say in details, we see this the rise of private ownership in terms of broadcasting or represented by the online video platform actually came from by a kind of constant vice. Because if you look at this regulation from the National Radio and TV Administration, we say actually as early as 2008, the state tried to nationalize the audio and video platforms. It didn't succeed anyway, but there was this effort to nationalize these platforms. If we read this regulation about online audio and video platforms, which was firstly issued in 2008 and later changed in the 2010s, we see there are different articles. And Article 7 is about the service provider has to apply for a license. And then Article 8 said, in order to qualify for the application, you have to be a state-owned or state-controlled company. And also Article 6 says we need to promote socialist values. So these are the different articles. We can say that the most important article is Article 7 and Article 8, that you have to be a state-owned and a state-controlled company to be a kind of online audio and video service provider. So that is from this regulation, but the regulation did not actually come into practice, and the existing platforms, including Tudou and Youku, and also, by the way, iQIYI and many others, later TikTok, they still keep the status quo, and that specific article was not materialized. And then this is the permission that is called audio and video service permission. And in order to apply for such a permission or license, there are different conditions, but that is specific, most difficult condition was not materialized. In that case, I try to argue that the effort to nationalize the online video platforms did not succeed. And that paved the way, by the way, for the rise of online video platforms, and particularly for the success of TikTok abroad. And that means the success of private ownership in terms of video platforms. And of course, this is the regulatory structure about the TV and online video platforms on the left, the party on the right, the government. At that time, it is called SARFT, or State Administration for Radio, film and television. Later, it was changed into National Radio and TV Administration. And so that is one example that I want to share with you. And the next example I want to introduce is about the Ministry of Transportation, who is in charge of the ride-hailing service platforms in terms of regulation. So in that case, there is again a kind of fight or a kind of revision or a kind of a change. We all know that digital economy is still in the gray area. So in 2016, Chinese government tried to somehow issue or legalize the digital economy in terms of this ride-hailing services. So there is there are new rules, and it was issued by Ministry of Transportation. And the 2016 rule said this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 until 12 conditions in order to become a kind of service provider in terms of ride-hailing platform. And we can see, number one, you have to fill this form. This form is called the Ride-Hailing Platform Operation Permission or License Application Form. So this is from the website of Ministry of Transportation. Number two is about the status of investors and also the person in charge, the credibility letter, and so on and so forth. So you need to provide the personal information in order to become a kind of owner of a ride-hailing platform. And number three is very specific, because number three says you have to provide, in order to apply for a license in terms of a ride-hailing platform, you have to write this business license for enterprise legal person, the legal person. And in addition to that, the 2016 regulation said, for the foreign invested enterprise, you should provide certificate of approval of establishment of enterprise with foreign investment in PRC. That is, you have to get the approval from the state in order to invest in this ride-hailing service. However, in the year 2019, this specific condition was removed from the rule about ride-hailing platform service, which says this is actually open to foreign investors. And by the way, they enjoy exactly the same condition or treatment as domestic investors. Of course, condition number 4 said you have to prove that you have the capability to process the information and data, and also the materials that you have the ability to provide this information. And there is also a condition about database. And number 7 is also very important, by the way, that you have to provide a statement about the fact that your servers are located in China mainland. And also you have cybersecurity protection measures, and you have ways to cooperate with the banks or Alipay or WeChat Pay. So you have to also provide information about your location and staff members and so on and so forth. And so the 2016 rule regulation is different from the 2019 regulation in terms of the removal of this restriction of foreign investment. And specifically, the Ministry of Transportation said that in an explanation about this removal of this particular term, that the State Council had decided to cancel restrictions regarding foreign investment in road and transportation. And also there is a negative list for foreign investment access. So there should be no access restriction for foreign investment in this particular field. So then there's a kind of this revision. And by the way, the next step is a kind of reform or removal of restrictions in terms of service kind of industry, which will happen rather recently. And this is the example about ride-hailing platforms. And this is a kind of license that you can get from the Ministry of Transportation. And it is, so you can operate with the private ownership. And then one particular question I want to raise to the participants and to also our panelists is that actually, in order to somehow issue such a regulation, there has to be a consensus of these 7 ministries. So it's a cross-ministry regulatory framework in terms of ride-hailing services. It's not dominated, by the way, by the Ministry of Transport. And in order to somehow issue these rules, the Ministry of Transport has to ask for permission from Ministry of Industry, Information Technology, or the MIT, or Ministry of Public Security, and by the way, also Cyberspace Administration of China. So the question I ask is that why a cross-ministry regulatory framework is not multi-stakeholder, it's multi-ministry, works better than a single ministry regulation in terms of this service? And the answer is that the Ministry of Transport as a kind of a traditional simple in terms of regulator in terms of in this field, the road and transportation is somehow obsessed with vested interests, and they may favor when making digital policies, they may favor traditional businesses or the state capital, let's say the state-owned businesses, because traditionally there are some very state-owned enterprises that are in this field. But now the decision has to be made in a cross-ministry way, in a cross-ministry regulatory framework, and then that may provide a rather fair and equal treatment between the old players and the new players like Didi and many other service providers. So that is
Peixi, we've got about 3 or 4 minutes left for your time slot.
Yeah, the time is good. Thank you, Milton. So that is about the second example I want to share with you. And also the last example. This is about a leading small group for cybersecurity and informatization. That was established in 2014. And that institution is actually a kind of group. Its office is located in CAC, or Cyberspace Administration of China. That represents 2 shifts. So this is on the left is the structure of this group from the ministry, from foreign affairs, industry, information technology, and the National Development Reform Commission, to education, culture. All these ministries were involved as a member of this leading group. And they represent a shift of approaching cyberspace from economic growth to both economic growth and cybersecurity, and approaching cybersecurity from content challenges to both content challenge and information infrastructure security. And by the way, this happened after 2013 Snowden leaks. Thank you, Milton.
Okay, good. You're right on time. We might have time for a single question. Peixi, when you talk about the Article 8 calling for state ownership of all broadcasting you say it was a failure. Was the actual article just ignored or was it repealed?
It is not repealed, Milton. It is still there as a kind of zombie, but it happened this way. That rule does not apply to the existing players. So the existing players that happened before this license, before this rule, they can operate the way they operate before. And by the way, for the new players, they can always buy from a license from the existing players. In that case, there is a kind of rather adequate supply of license in this field to allow private ownership to exist.